Welcome to the Navik Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Navik's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.navik.co. This episode is brought to you by our partners at GameSight. GameSight provides full-service campaign management, taking charge of consulting, influencer discovery, relationship management, billing, and reporting, leaving you free to focus on your core business. With their measurement platform and creator-focused programs, GameSight helps brands grow, increase revenue, and ensure player satisfaction worldwide. And since the company draws from almost a decade of battle-tested experience, including with notable customers like Bungie, Capcom, Ubisoft, and hundreds more, GameSight's attribution platform meets the unique needs of PC, console, and Web3 games. Notably, GameSight brings display, social, influencer, and affiliate marketing into one dashboard for easy comparison. Marketing attribution for PC and console games is complicated, but whether your game is free to play, premium, or supported by DLCs, GameSight has you covered. To learn more about how GameSight has served other games teams and how it can help yours, simply visit gamesight.io or check out the link in the show notes. And with that, let's jump into the episode.
Hello, and welcome to the Navik Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Niko Vuori. I am very excited for today's episode. We have a great guest with us today, who in many ways is at least partially responsible for the start of my own career in gaming, back in the OG Zynga days. Our guest today is none other than Amitt Mahajan, one of the creators of Farmville. He was one of the founders of My Mini Life, which is a company Zynga acquired in 2009, and which ultimately led to the development of the game that became the cultural icon, the internet treasure, as Mark Pincus liked to say, that we all grew to know and love. Among other things, Amitt has also been a co-founder in 2017 of Rarebits, which is relevant to this conversation since it is or was at least, a zero-fee NFT marketplace. And now he's the founder of Proof of Play, which just announced a $33 million seed round led by, and if you guessed A16Z, well done, since who else would lead a seed round of that magnitude? Just kidding. Congratulations, Amitt. I'll let Amitt talk much more about what Proof of Play does, but in a nutshell, they are building fully on-chain games. And this is a topic that I have genuinely been wanting to talk about on the pod for quite some time now. And while there have been a few others who've been tinkering with this notion of fully on-chain games, I have not really seen anything that has the potential to break through. Not yet. Until, of course, now. If anyone can make fully on-chain games work, it is Amitt and his team. And so I'm delighted to welcome him to the show to talk about Proof of Play, his vision for what fully on-chain games can offer gamers, and indeed, the entire gaming community. Amitt, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, with that out of the way, let's get right into it. So, Amitt, I kind of gave the Cliff's Notes version, or the Blinkist version, if you will, of your career, but you've done a lot more than that. Why don't you tell us more about your background and then your journey into Web3?
Sure, yeah. So it's been a bit of a ride. I started off, basically modding games. That got me a job at Epic Games out of college, where I worked on the Unreal Engine, Gears of War, before leaving to start My Mini Life, which you mentioned earlier. After we were acquired by Zynga, I helped build the Farmville engine, which then became the Ville engine, for lack of a better term, and it basically powered all of the games that were built on Facebook by Zynga at the time. And so, after doing a few different games at Zynga, I left and started a growth marketing company that would help other game developers basically like market and grow their games, utilizing kind of the practices that we developed at Zynga. And so that's actually how we connected, right? Because you were at a company
right.
called Rocket Games, and we were helping you guys out, helping helping you guys kind of grow the games that you guys were releasing. After a while, I just decided that being in ad tech like really wasn't my thing. So I left to start a fund focused on virtual reality and augmented reality. That was really enlightening for a few reasons. One, I think that technology is still a ways away from consumer adoption. Maybe Apple will pull it off, maybe they won't. But I spent a bunch of time kind of digging into like virtual worlds, the future of online identity, the metaverse, which now has become more of kind of a passé term. And that also kind of led me to crypto, where I spent a bunch of time thinking about, how would truly online digital universes exist? And at the time, Ethereum just came out. I started to kind of see what was happening there. But it really wasn't until, I saw CryptoKitties and what that team was doing with NFTs that I was like, oh, okay, we can actually do like true digital ownership now. And my immediate reaction was, oh, we should just go build this thing of crypto. But then at the time, it was too early. I was like, there's gonna be a ton of other companies doing this. Like, why don't we actually just focus on like the assets themselves? And that's when I started Rarebits, which was this zero fee NFT marketplace. I think we launched maybe the same week as OpenSea. It was around that time. So we were early to it. And so, if you're talking about my career and how I got here, I think if I have one kind of common factor in anything I've done is I'm perpetually early to things. I was early to social gaming. I was early to VR. I was early to NFTs, and I'm definitely early to on-chain games. And so, if you kind of look at the data points I just shared with you, it's just, this is literally like if you took all those things and smashed them together, it kind of makes sense that I'm here building game engines, doing stuff with crypto, working with digital ownership and identity, working with digital universes. It's kind of, all those things just kind of really are being utilized here at Proof of Play.
Awesome. So Proof of Play, let's get to Proof of Play. You are building fully on-chain games. And like I said, I'm super excited about this concept. I've been looking at it myself. Essentially means no centralized servers. What does that mean in practice? What are you doing?
Yeah. So like when you build games normally, like, you have a server that's essentially like storing and watching and making sure that all of the actions that players are taking in games are valid, right? So if you're like, imagine you're playing chess, every move that you make, on chess.com, they're checking to make sure that that's a valid move and you're not cheating. It then takes that move and it sends it to all the other players, records in a database somewhere. And so like with Farmville, like every time you would play that game and work on your farm, we would send it to Zynga servers and we would just essentially we'd store the results of your gameplay actions. With blockchain gaming, it's different. And so every action you take is a transaction that's then, validated not by a central server, but by a set of distributed nodes on a blockchain. And, so instead of there being one party that's checking everything, every person who's essentially a node in this blockchain is watching everyone else. So it's kind of peer-to-peer validation. And every time that you make a change to your gameplay or take a gameplay action, instead of it storing into a database, it's being written into this like kind of shared time capsule that is the blockchain, right? And so what's really interesting is that, you get a bunch of unique properties out of that. One is that the blockchain itself ensures that the blockchain itself stores the state of everyone's gameplay, it essentially makes sure that even if, one node goes down, there's a bunch of copies of it. And so, at Zynga, we had 300 million people play Farmville, 1 billion hours were put into it. And in 2020, the game was shut down because Flash, the technology the game was based on, was no longer supported on mobile phones. And so as a result of that, the players who had put all of this time, investment, they had bought virtual items, they were just pretty much out of luck. That database was gone. That billion plus hours has just disappeared. And so, but if that game was stored on the blockchain, like someone could pick up the pieces, right? Someone could build a different client. Players can make a copy of the data that's there. So a game that's on chain and is like truly on chain is like 100% open source, 100% open data. And so it really kind of enables all these unique properties. The first is persistent. These games are truly, they last forever. And two is they're extensible, which essentially means that someone could take that data and create something new. They can remix the game. And so, games have always had this property, but on-chain gaming really kind of supercharges it. And so, I'm happy to go deeper into it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do want to go a little bit deeper on. So obviously the digital ownership piece is a well-trodden path by now. That's what most developers have done with NFTs. But typically they keep the gameplay logics on their own centralized servers, and that obviously affords a whole bunch of stuff that we can get into later in this conversation. But you alluded to the fact that digital ownership, persistence. What else does being fully on chain enable that you really can't do otherwise? Because that's always the question you should ask as a developer: is why build on chain? Why make it more complicated than it needs to be? And obviously, a lot of things will smooth out over the years as infrastructure gets built out. But what is it for you that being fully on chain enables that just can't be done otherwise?
Yeah, so the first is this idea that the games are forever, which I think you kind of alluded to with persistence. And as a player, when a game is on chain, you don't have to worry about essentially, in finance, it's like single party risk, right? Like the game company's going to go away. They're gonna change the rules on you. In fact, Vitalik, one of the creators of Ethereum, famously said that like the reason he started Ethereum was because Blizzard changed like the balance of his warlock character in World of Warcraft. Right. And he's just like the centralized party just has full control over this thing, which, he invested his time into. And so, the first is just that like, as a player, you have a certain insurances that like, okay, if I'm going to invest and write the story of my character, that like, it's always going to be available to me. And in that way, like, it's one way to think about this is that like the Ethereum blockchain itself is in some ways the most permanent form of data storage we have, right? Like if we were to put something on Dropbox or Google Drive or wherever, those companies can go away. You could forget to pay the Dropbox bill and you can lose everything you've ever stored there. But if it's on the Ethereum blockchain, it's essentially copied, across 100,000 nodes all over the world. So even if 99,000 of those nodes go away, you can always spin up a new one and get a full copy of it and data keeps living. So in some ways, if you truly kind of go through the exercise of thinking what does permanence actually mean, you end up realizing that the most permanent form of storage that exists is actually putting something on the Ethereum blockchain, even more so than these like huge multinational companies that say that they're going to keep your data secure. And so in that way, I think about it because it's all open space. Anyone can write to it that like, this is, humanity's time capsule. And so a lot of the NFT art and stuff that was coming out is I think it's valuable in the same way that like caveman drawings are valuable. The stuff that's on chain is permanent, has the highest chance of surviving well into the future than even physical art, which, we lose to floods and fires and all this other stuff. And so now look, I don't know if like the history of your like, your RPG character should last for 1,000 years, but the properties of it and starting to think about that way are really interesting. It's not ephemeral like other kind of things that we had before. And the second thing, which you got at, which we alluded to earlier, was this idea of extensibility. And when I think about extensibility, it's really, I think about like how games were created decades ago, which is like, I got my start in gaming by modding Doom, right? I would go and make levels for Doom and Quake. Then I hit the limits of the game engine. I decided to build my own game engine. And so modding and this idea of creating new games from existing games has pretty much existed since games have existed, digital games have existed. And so like, when we think about like Counter-Strike coming out of Half-Life or Dota coming out of Warcraft 3, like in some ways the mods themselves are actually more popular than the original game itself. And so, but like as we've kind of gone from downloadable software games to games as a service or games that are on mobile devices, modding has kind of gone away on most platforms. Like, yes, there's a bit of it still on PC, but like it's kind of like this like niche thing. And what's really cool about on-chain games is because it's all open source and open data, it's permissionless to mod, which essentially means that anyone can take, someone could take, our game Pirate Nation and literally create Ninja Nation. In fact, we encourage it. They can build their own clients, right? So like you can use our game client, or you can build your own. Someone showed me recently that they built a command line client for the game, which is really cool, right? And like that's like that is kind of a return to what the internet originally was. If you think about it, it was, yes, we have HTML, which is an open protocol, but then you can use whatever browser you want, right? You can take an existing page, you can remix and put up your own page on the internet, and other people can use their browser to get to it. So, so the on-chain games, in my opinion, is like where it really starts to get really interesting is this idea that every time we create a game or someone remixes it, that's now fodder for the next person to remix it, for the next person to create something new. And so now, we're getting this like level of like hyper collaboration that like hasn't really existed in the games industry before. I think of it's like very similar to what GitHub did for software development. I think on-chain gaming can do for game development.
All right. Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and we're definitely going to get into extensibility a little bit later in this episode. But I'm going to start with this notion of forever game, which, by the way, I love that phrase. I don't know if you coined it, but if you did, well done. It's very resonant to me, and obviously describes what it is very well, just in those two words. But I do want to ask this question. It's not a tough question, but I think it's a legitimate question to ask anybody who is trying to build something forever. You kind of said, do we need this RPG character to live for 1,000 years? That's the question, really. Do players want forever games? Do they care that their character lives forever? Now, Vitalik cares, sure. And of course, there's some percentage of people and players who really do care. But is it a big enough segment of the gaming community that cares that their characters are in a forever game, or this game will last for 1,000 years?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. And, my view of it is very much like, especially when it comes to block space, there's a market for it. Right. So I believe in like, free markets for anything. And so let's go back to the time capsule analogy here. Right. Like, should a piece of NFT art be put on chain, or should this character be put on chain? Should your gameplay actions be put on chain? And the way that is determined, I think, is based on pricing. Right. So essentially, every time you write to the blockchain, you're paying gas. You're paying a transaction fee. And I would dictate that if you found value in putting that data on chain and you're willing to pay the price for it, then it should be there, right? And I'm not the one to determine that. I think the individual creators kind of figure that out. A lot of folks determined that when they were minting their piece of art, that hey, like that this is worth me inscribing this. Now, like in terms of philosophically, should these things exist? If everything we put out there is now, you can't talk about one without the other. If I create something that I put on chain, right, and it exists, it doesn't have to just exist within my universe, the context that it was originally created in, right? It can be used in other creations. So let's go really simply here. Imagine I create a bunch of generic art, things like trees and plants and cars and whatever, right? And I use them in like a city building game. That game may just die, right? Maybe, players decide, what, it's not worth playing anymore. But it's possible that someone else takes those assets, which are now on chain, and uses them in a brand new game and doesn't have to recreate that art, right? And, if you think about games as they've existed before, so much of game development is literally just composition. It's taking pieces from other games, art from art packs or whatever it may be, putting them together and creating something new. So what's really cool about this is even if the game itself is no longer there, and the potential for the pieces of that game to then be used to create something new is there. So the next developer, the person who doesn't have an art team, who doesn't have the full backing of the team that originally created the game, can actually get a leg up, right? So what you're really doing is every time we create something, you're actually creating shoulders for other people to stand on. And that's the default. And so I can't see a universe in which this doesn't eventually become the main way that people create these things, because it's just all we're doing is collectively creating a public commons, right? It's like Creative Commons for everyone. And that just enables a lot more creativity and allows people who don't have the full skill set to at least get their ideas out.
Yeah, I absolutely buy the developer perspective. I think that answer was great for the developer perspective, and I'm 100% on board that yes, it's great to have a Creative Commons for all these assets. You could cynically argue that the Unity asset store kind of does this, but I understand that that's a centralized server, and they could go away. And if they're going to be slapping, this episode is being recorded, I think just a couple of days after Unity announced their per download fee, which has the industry up in arms. I can totally see that maybe people don't want to use the Unity engine anymore, and they'll migrate away. So sooner than you might even think. So I understand the developer perspective 100%, being a developer myself. But I do want to come back to this question, which I'm not sure you fully answered here, is do players actually care about this stuff, right? And again, some do. Vitalik clearly cares. But do enough players care that even though it's easier for developers to build these games, or you can come in and stand on the shoulders of the giants, the player arguably doesn't really care. They just care that they're playing a fun game, and that it's entertainment time. They'll spend an hour, 2 hours, 2 years playing this game, and then at some point they'll churn out, right? I mean, that's just what games are. So I'm very curious about that player perspective, and would love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. I'll answer that question in two parts. So the first, and I'll be super direct about it, right? So two things. One is that my belief is that for certain so two things. One is I don't think people are going to play a game because it's permanent. I think they're going to play because it's fun, and we're super clear about that, because ultimately, we can sit here and talk about the technical benefits all we want about the on-chain games, but my job as a leader of a game studio is to build fun games and to entertain people. And my belief is that over time, they will start to see the benefits of it. Now, I think, this is a very personal kind of decision, right? So you're right. You say you place the best example I have here is you look at something like Pokemon Go, which was had this huge rise, and then kind of hit this plateau of players. It kind of, spiky, and then kind of, so there is a set of people who just, you're right, they don't care. If Pokemon Go went away after the first 2 weeks the game came out and was popular, they'd be fine with it. But there is a cohort of people, usually the most invested players, the players who are there for community, the players who are there for the franchise, whatever it may be. There's people who essentially, once they stick around, they essentially never churn, right? And what this does is this gives those people the choice to keep the game going, even after the original developer itself was like, this is no longer profitable for us or technically feasible or whatever to keep the game going. So what it's doing is it's actually just giving people a choice. And the same, I would say this actually touches on the same debate of if someone was to buy a digital game or a physical game, there's some people who are like, no, I'm always buying a physical game, even though digital games have all of these additional properties. And the reason why is because ultimately they are in control of the thing they purchase, the thing they put investment into, right? It's theirs. It's an asset that they, is belongs to them. And so, I think, again, it's very personal. I think some people who are like, whatever, it doesn't matter. I think for a lot of people who are really get into the universes, they care a lot. And I will say that, from my perspective, playing MMOs in the past, being a game creator in the past, the reason that people tend to stick around games is not because of the game itself, but because of the community that they've fostered in the online game. And actually, that's the other thing to kind of think about is that, if you shut down an online game, you're not just shutting down the game servers, you're also potentially shutting down the communities. right? And that's actually how I got into this to begin with. I was like, oh, like how do you create permanent forever communities? And the answer is you bootstrap them with games, and then you essentially ensure that the community can exist even if the game was there or without the original game developer. And so for that reason, I don't think I think people will care, at least some fraction of people.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. I think the question we're all as an industry trying to answer is how big is that slice, right? And we just don't know that right now. I think that's fair to say. So, is it 5%? Is it 50%? Is it 75%? We don't know, right?
I couldn't tell you, but I mean, if we were to look at the history of games, it's like how many people will play mobile games? How many people will play MMOs? Like anytime you have a paradigm shift in games, there is this we don't know till we know, right? And like I said, we're super early to this stuff, but the ideals of what's possible are worth trying, and that's the reason we're doing this company. It's like the exploration of this idea.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I'm doing the same thing. We're exploring how many people care about this, and over time, people will learn. There'll be a group of people who are early adopters, just like with any technology curve, right? There'll be those early adopters, and then there'll be some laggards over there. And so we do know that there will be a percentage of people. We just don't know how many. Okay, well, let's jump on to something else here. So let's go to the technical stuff, because that is important. That is relevant here. We are very early, and so there aren't a lot of tools out there. So I think in general, it's true to say that the more stuff, right, you put on chain, the harder it is to build from a technical standpoint. And some of the things we as developers take for granted on centralized servers, like I think you even alluded to these gameplay validation, game economy balancing. They're easier to do when you control it as a developer on centralized servers. It's harder to do when you're building on chain. What are some of the challenges that you're facing, maybe even some unexpected ones that you didn't think you were going to encounter, and how are you solving those?
Yeah, I mean, so there's all sorts of really tricky things that we've had to do in order to make these games work. But so blockchain games traditionally have a history of being viewed as complex, expensive. Just to the basics of doing something on chain is that you have a wallet, you have to pay gas in order to make changes to the game state on chain, and that requires confirmations and all this other stuff. And so our North Star is how do we create games that essentially don't put the technology in your face, right? They're not so there's technical problems, and there's also design problems here, like product design problems. And, so one of the things that we did, the first thing we did was we tried to figure out how to get rid of transaction pop-ups. So, imagine that every time, you played, you pressed the button in some other game, there was a PayPal window that popped up. You had to pay 2 cents, right, in order to take an action in a game or attack an enemy or whatever. So we did this thing where we invented this signless and gasless solution, and basically what we're doing is we're provisioning a burner wallet for the user. So every time they log into the device, we create a burner wallet for them. They have a wallet that essentially holds all of their stuff, right? And that wallet gives the burner wallet permission to take gameplay actions on behalf of the main kind of player wallet. And underneath the covers, we're just signing transactions. We're sending it to a relay server that we run that basically just adds the gas to it and essentially allows the game to flow smoothly. So if you're playing, Pirate Nation, for example, you're just going around click, 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 click. And it's just like playing a game that's existed before. It's essentially, from a user experience perspective, exactly the same. And but underneath the covers, there's all sorts of complexity in order to make that a seamless experience. The other thing that's really hard is when you're on chain, again, everything is open data, which essentially means there's no secrets, right? So in games, secrets are really important. Imagine you're playing poker and you can see everyone's hand, right? It breaks the game. And so a lot of what we had to do was, and something we're working on right now, is essentially an off-chain, we call it the working title, either POP protocol or PvP protocol. We're figuring it out. But basically what it is this decentralized validation. When you take a move, you send essentially your game state to another to a set of nodes that also knows how the game works, and it essentially signs off saying this was a valid move or this was not a valid move, right? And in that way, you can allow players to compete with each other, essentially off chain, and then store the results of that match on chain. So what's crazy about this is at the extreme, you could even do something like take like a Smash Brothers or a fighting game, take the entire move list, all the inputs, right? Send it to like a judge, it's the equivalent of like a referee who says, yes, this is all valid. They sign it, they use cryptographic signing and say, yes, this is valid. And then essentially publish that on chain. So now you essentially have decentralized refereeing and validation and secure matches without ever having to run a centralized server. And so, we're in the really like kind of early stages of that. But, that plus the signless gasless stuff, some things we had to do to solve for random numbers. Like it's a lot of work, but, someone has to figure these things out. So we're going at it.
I'm breaking into a cold sweat just listening to you here, taking on all this pain, and I applaud you, sir, for being the brave front runner to us all, for us all, to figure out some of these problems. Because it's not easy doing this stuff, and how you describe it just.
But dude, it's so much fun.
Oh, I bet.
It's so much fun. It's like, like what's the point? Like I didn't start this company to just go and replace credit card payments with NFT purchases. That's like a really dumb reason to do it. Just build games that way. Like there has to be something bigger, right? It can't just be about the, just using the technology for using technology's sake. There has to be kind of a reason to do it. And the challenge is like, there's really a reward in the challenge itself. And luckily my team is all kind of built that way too. And, maybe we're just like, we're gluttons for punishment, but like, honestly, we're having a ton of fun figuring this stuff out.
No, I absolutely. And I genuinely believe you. But yeah, it's just, that's a lot of technical pain to take on as a front runner. So no, I applaud you. I really do. So let's talk about your first game, Pirate Nation. It lives on Ethereum. And that part totally makes sense to me. It's non-controversial, but your gameplay takes place on the L2 Arbitrum Nova. And I think you are genuinely the first guest we've had on this pod building on Arbitrum Nova. So I am very curious about this choice. But we're going to start with Pirate Nation first, because that's the game. And then we're going to come back to why did you make these choices, technology choices, especially around Arbitrum Nova?
Sure. So Pirate Nation, just for your listeners, is a on-chain RPG. You have a pirate crew that you go and you level up. You basically gather loot. It's like an energy-based game. You go on quests, you gather loot, you craft that loot into ships and attachments and all sorts of other things, and then you go to battle. And the battle itself is like a kind of card-based, turn-based game. Where you're fighting other pirate crews, fantastical creatures, that kind of thing, to see who can become, the best pirate, the pirate captain in the world, right? So we have a leaderboard where players compete with each other. We have like raid events where they collaborate to go fight, like take down bosses, that kind of thing. And we launched the game back in December 2022 as a token gated experience, which essentially mean we did a free mint. We essentially said, hey, we're just going to give away 9,000 pirates. So anyone who wants one can just get one. You have to pay a little bit of gas on Ethereum. I think it was like a few bucks at the time, but like in order to mint it. And then in the first version of the game, once you had your pirate, you had to bridge to Polygon. And so again, I mentioned like, every time you take a action on chain, you have to pay gas, and the Ethereum blockchain is very expensive. It's just not tenable for building games. Mm-hmm. So even though like the pirates themselves were on Ethereum, all the gameplay actions were happening on this cheaper chain. And so for us, originally that was Polygon, and we, in order to, create a seamless experience from day one, we were paying for all of the gas for all the players. And, we had, I forgot a lot of my numbers now, but like essentially, in this kind of first beta period of the game, the first few months, the gas costs on Polygon kept going up to the point where like we were spending like $3,000 to $4,000 a day on gas. Yeah, it's good.
That doesn't scale. That doesn't scale.
It doesn't scale. It doesn't scale. And so like, but like our model for thinking about like kind of the Ethereum ecosystem is that the L1 is the most secure. That's where you want like your most valuable stuff, right? And then the various L2s are just essentially execution environments, right? So it's the equivalent of being like, okay, I have like an AWS EC2 instance, or do I have it like a Microsoft Azure server instance? So from my perspective, like, okay, if Polygon, was too expensive for us, we should we should just migrate the game to another network. And so we did. My team is just absolutely insane. They're like crazy the way they figured this out, but like they migrated the game seamlessly. So players didn't even have to do anything. And so, we moved, it's been a few months now from Polygon to Arbitrum Nova. And Nova's been really cool because like one, it's the way to think about these blockchains is they all have different properties. Like some are faster, some are more secure, etc. And Nova, it's Arbitrum itself is a roll up, it's an optimistic roll up, but Nova is a data availability community, which long story short just means it's like just a bunch of services validating actions, right? And so it's faster and it's cheaper. And so now the game has been running on Nova for the last few months, and it's been great. It's like super fast for like, players take actions, the things like underneath the cover, their game states persisted really quickly. For us, it's a lot cheaper to run the game. I do think though, in the long run that like where this all goes is towards like L3s, which is like an app specific chain, which essentially means you move to a chain that's gasless that, is running just your game code. So again, like this idea of split execution is really unique. The idea of like assets versus gameplay execution, having these on different chains, I think is a pretty unique idea. And I think we're probably one of the first studios to do this. And we had to kind of solve it because we were just like bleeding out because of the gas costs originally.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if I'm understanding this correctly, I'm not a technologist, and I know you are. You would have, so you're the first one I think has also brought up the notion of L3. So you'd have a game-specific L3, which is essentially your version of a centralized server where all the game logic happens. It knows the rules of the game. It knows what's a valid move, what's not. But there's no gas, right? And nothing's on chain yet. Then you roll up to the L2. Is that right? Like once a day or once an hour or something like that?
Well, so the question is, why do the gas costs go up on Polygon, right? And so the reason why is because we were part of a shared blockchain. So we were running our game and we were just happily, running our stuff. And then another project launched that was like, I think, I don't remember the name of it, but it was like a DeFi project. And people were just like churning and burning through transactions, trying to like, get this, just to get their, I think they were trading or something. And as a result, it was causing the gas costs to go up for all other projects on Polygon. And so, as a result, our costs went up. So one way to think about it is that if you're on a shared blockchain, you're at the whim of everything else that's running on that chain. And so now there's this idea that like a bunch of companies are looking at, which is the idea that like, okay, you have application specific chains. So it's still a blockchain, but there's only one application running on it. And that essentially ensures, like fixed pricing or however you want to figure it out. And then what you can do is you can have validators like nodes that are shared across multiple applications. And so it essentially enables a lot more consistency and predictability in terms of pricing. And you're right, actually, you hit on something really important, which is this idea that, and this is going back to kind of our original point of like, should everything be on chain or not? Like, should gameplay be on chain? Should this art piece be on chain? Actually, I think a good way of figuring that out is to put it on L3. And then the things that are worth persisting, someone can pay to have persisted on an L2 or all the way back down to the Ethereum L1. And so to me, this is all about like how you create a free market of data. And for gameplay, I think most people don't care. They're just like, let's make sure it's fast, cheap, and secure, reliable. And then over time, persistence you can pay for.
Yeah, my cold sweats are back. No, just kidding. Let's shift gears a little bit again, because I do want to come back to this extensibility notion, which I know is really, really interesting. And that's part of the reason why I'm really interested in fully on-chain games, maybe even the main part. And so you're not just building your own game, and over time, of course, games, I'm presuming, a portfolio. That's where you start, of course, proof of concept, dog fooding, all that stuff. But I know that you're also hoping / encouraging, I guess, other developers to take what you've built on chain, take it to the next level, maybe take it in different directions, really leaning into the composability aspect that blockchain enables. And this is obviously kind of modding on steroids. You've mentioned modding. You got your start in modding, Doom and Quake. So how do you see modding working differently in fully on-chain games versus how it works now? And how do you see this third-party developer ecosystem evolving over time? How different is this from what we've always had in the modding community?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One, that I think the tools themselves can actually be made a lot easier to use. So we've always had open source. We've always had code sharing. But when GitHub came around, it kind of rethought and kind of it basically rethought what it meant to actually collaborate on software, right? I can go to GitHub today. I can press the fork button and have a complete copy of a repository with all the code and everything ready to go. And I can just run the install command. I'm off to the races with my new project. And so I believe that what we can do is actually, when we think about modding itself, there's different levels of ease of modding, right? So at the hardest level is someone being okay, I put a zip file up with all the Quake source code. You have to go copy it, you figure out how to compile it, and you can start doing stuff there. Then there's one level easier, which is what we see on with UEFN and Roblox, where it's okay, you have these games and there's some prefabs, and other people can sell prefabs to you, and you can then put things together and start to do things. And then I think there's going to be a third version of this, which is literally anytime you're playing a game, you're also able to start editing it, right? So we have this idea you drew the distinction earlier between developers and players, but I actually think those lines really start to blur in games like Roblox and Minecraft, where literally every player is a creator, right? And and I think that's the direction Epic's going in with the UEFN as well. And from my perspective, the rendering side, which is what most of these companies are doing, is interesting. But where things really start to get a bit crazier when I can create a new project and I essentially have a list of ingredients that I can pull from. So you built a bunch of games before, this. I don't know how many times I've built a leveling system, dozens, right? How many times I've had to develop a quest system or achievements or any of these other things. But what's really cool is that when you think about network effects here, right? What you're doing is you're taking modding and you're adding network effects on top of it, because everything is open read and open data by default. And if it's all built using the same set of primitives, that also means it's all intercompatible. So, to draw a non-technical analogy, if we're creating Iron Man, right? What we're doing is we're establishing the Marvel Cinematic universe. Some other company or creator can go create the X-Men, Spider-Man, etc. And just because, we're based off the same set of primitives in this case, those characters can all cross universes by default. So one of the really challenging parts when people talk about the metaverse or any of this NFT stuff is hey, you can take things from one place to another. But the issue with that is that usually it requires a ton of work in order to actually integrate those things. But by building off a same common building block, interoperability is guaranteed to at least some level by default. Now, you still have issues with art and so on. We're doing voxel-based art for that reason. It creates art compatibility. But basically this idea that I've created a module, it's possible for someone to create the last leveling system ever. It's possible for someone to create the last quest system ever. And then every future game developer that comes on just uses, the quest system from 10 years ago and the leveling system from 10 years ago, because there's no reason to build it again. So it's possible for us to start creating software or modules for software that are considered done. And it's this like really powerful idea, because when you don't have to build all this other stuff, it allows you to focus on the things that are new. And so like, this is what's powerful about it, is that like when you have really great creator tools that do a lot of the scaffolding for you, you can focus on just your content, the thing that you're bringing that's new to the table. And what's cool is the thing you're bringing new to the table can then be the scaffolding for the next person. And so like, it's wait to see, but because of the network effects here, I think it could result in like the type of creative output that we've never seen before in the games industry.
But the $1 million question is, can you make the Marvel Cinematic Universe work with DC Comics? I think that's what our listeners are all curious about. Do you enable that? Because that alone would be
well technically huge. You could, only because the equivalent analogy here would be that they're both printed on paper, right? And arguably you could take with paper and ink, you can literally, as long as they're created with paper and ink, they can live next to each other. You could take those pages and splice them into a comic book and actually create a merged copy. Maybe the licenses won't allow that, but it's not stopping anyone from being able to do it. Yeah. But digitally, we can't do that yet because of all this other stuff that, it's come up in the last 10 years of building products.
Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. No, I love the vision here. And I do see that this could enable a really kind of, modding on steroids, like I said, really taking these building blocks and going big. You alluded to the fact that you already have some developers taking some of your stuff. And you've been in stealth until now. We're recording this, under embargo. So I actually don't have a ton of, information on what's happening in that kind of developer ecosystem. Do you have developers working on your stuff already? Like, what are they doing? How is it being received?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to use the word developer really loosely here, but like, essentially it's players, right? So we have a bunch of, the game's been live, so you can go on Discord now and see what folks have been doing, because we've had live players for the last, now it's been 9 months. We've been doing releases every week to the game and just making it better and better, but we're basically building a public. And, someone in our community, literally one of our top players shared this with me, and they've been building the tools to help them play the game. Right. So like, again, it's blurring that line. It's not like I'm going and like contracting with a bunch of other game companies, be like, use my engine. In fact, that's like, it's fine. We'll eventually do that, like if folks find it useful, but like I'm taking a page out of, Epic and Tim Sweeney's book here, which is just build a great game. And it's probably likely that if you are able to build a great product, that you're going to get some technology and a platform out of it that's going to be useful to other people. And so that's my primary focus. And so the fact that like people are already being like, okay, like, we're taking what already exists and we're trying to make, the like hardcore power user version of it makes a ton of sense to me. In fact, like I was expecting something like this to happen. It's already happening, which is really cool because our user base is not super big yet because we just launched free to play. Yeah. And so, so like it's really happening very organically from the community itself.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's always a good sign if you're a developer, if you're trying to build something, when your community actually starts to do work. And I use do work not in a pejorative way, in a positive way. They're doing work. They're building tools. They're making it easier to play the game. They're making things that help others potentially as well. Usually a good sign. Usually you're onto something. So that's awesome. That's great to hear. Okay, well, we're coming kind of close to the end of our kind of scheduled episode here, but I do have one final question here. This is obviously a very ambitious project. Building the engine fully on chain, all of the things that were making me break into cold sweats. And you've obviously raised that seed round to match that ambition. And so I'm just curious to hear, what does your roadmap look like now for the next year, two, and beyond? Like, what does success look like? What would make you happy 12 months out from now, 24 months out, 36 months out?
Yeah, so I think for us, it's solving like a lot of the big pillars that go into a game, right? So, we just, I think, figured out onboarding. Like, how do you get, players into the game frictionlessly? next for us is going to be, okay, how do we get this on other devices? What would a mobile version of the game look like? How do we enable people to take part in the commerce aspects of blockchain games without having to like learn all this really complicated technology? Can we simplify that down? Right? Monetization, obviously really important for us. So we're still figuring that piece out as well. Right now, we've actually never sold anything at this company. We get a free mint, players are exchanging, and everything else that players have in their inventories is just through gameplay. We've never actually had like a premium purchase or anything like that. So we're going to start doing things like that in the future. Open sourcing everything. So we're just, for the sake of just moving fast, we've just been like, we haven't really focused on splitting our common technology out from the rest of our game to make it easy to open source. So we're gonna clean that stuff up. We're gonna put that out there. Starting to look at game 2 and 3 and what that looks like. And then also the last one that's really interesting is like more like collaborative and social features. So one way to think about Web3 games, but especially on-chain games, is that they're like basically like super social games, right? The gameplay doesn't just happen in the game itself. It also happens on Discord. It also happens on Twitter. It happens on OpenSea. Like there's all these other places that players are playing and competing and collaborating with each other, right? And so us putting more of those features into the game to help juice that is really, really important. So PvP is an obvious one. Then guilds, allowing people to collaborate with each other to create communities and actually have these communities live on chain versus just kind of in some centralized fashion. Lots of really hard problems to solve there. But again, all of this stuff, one way to think about it is like, as we build these things, we're not just building them for Pirate Nation. We're building these things for ourselves too, because, we are also standing on our own shoulders. And so it's ambitious, but that's the journey, right? What's cool is that we're actually just building foundational layers every time we launch something. So it doesn't really feel that ambitious to me. It feels like just a long trek, but not really exhausting in any way.
Gotcha. Okay. That's actually an interesting follow-up I have on that. So, you're dogfooding your own platform, if you will, or your own tools, your own assets. How extensible is that to games 2 and 3 that you're going to build yourself? I mean, I think that's really the big test, right? I would have thought internally is how much of what we have already built for Pirate Nation and all the tooling around that and all the features and the social and the PvP, like all that stuff, how much of that can you realistically use in game 2 without it feeling like it's almost the same as game 1, right? Is that a fair question?
That's a fair question. Actually, I've been lying to you a little bit here. So when I first pitched the company to people, I would say we're not a games company, we're a game company. And what that meant was that like there's never a game 2 or 3, right? It's all actually just one code base. And again, it's all on chain, it's all open source, it's all open data, which essentially means everything we've built for Pirate Nation is available to game 2 and to game 3. But like, if you think about it, go back to the Marvel Cinematic Universe concept, Pirate Nation is just one entry path. Game 2, Ninja Nation could just, or whatever, I'm not announcing Ninja Nation, but like if game 2 is Ninja Nation is just, it's just another entry path, right? But it's the same universe. And so, my view is that everything we build is usable in the next game. So even our avatar systems and a lot of decisions we made around art, like I'm like really, I haven't like emphasized the art stuff that we've been doing, but like we like standardize on a voxel format for art. And the reason why is that voxels are essentially the lingua franca of art, right? 2D art and hyper realistic 3D art doesn't merge across universes. But like Legos, you can have the Harry Potter Lego collection, you can have the Star Wars Lego collection. You're smashing together IP, but ultimately the pieces still fit together, right? So we're not just doing this at the code level, we're also doing this at the art level. And, everything that I do at the company is just focused on reducing our dev cycle speed, our dev, the time between releases, and just getting better and faster at, shipping. So I just tell folks all the time, just ship, 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 ship. That's all we care about. And my job as a CEO is to keep just amping the urgency and and accelerating us, helping us build tools that take away the time between shipping releases so we can put things out faster. And yeah, so I'm hoping that we can keep reusing the things that we're building. That's a short answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. Very final question here. What is the thing that you're most excited by kind of on the horizon, either internally or something that's, on the horizon that's going to happen externally that is just going to make, things easier, better, faster, blow up, whatever that might be. So what are you most excited by in the near-term horizon?
So we've been building our tooling internally. And I've been a tools developer my entire life. Like when I was at Epic, I was working in the Real Engine, the Real Editor, rather. So it's the thing that enables creative people to be more creative and more effectively, right? So I constantly ask myself, what is that for on-chain games? And we're like working on that internally, and we're like starting to actually use this stuff internally. We haven't like 100% cut over to it yet, but it's like I basically want to make it so that anyone can create confidence without having to write code or without having to, be technically proficient at all. In fact, if you think about what WordPress did for internet publishing, like what would the equivalent be for this space? And I'm excited to talk more about that in the future once we know we have the right answer for it.
Well, you're welcome back on the pod anytime to come and talk about that stuff. So awesome. Well, that's the end of our episode. It wraps it up nicely. Amitt, thank you so much for coming on the pod. I just really excited for the vision. Obviously, a lot of technical challenges. My cold sweats won't go away. I'll probably get flashbacks later on and into the future. But just a huge thank you for coming on, and obviously big congratulations on that seed round and obviously all the progress that you guys have been making.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a really great discussion.
Great. And a big thank you, of course, as always, to all of our listeners. We'll be back next week with more interviews, more insights, and more analysis from the weird and wonderful world of Web3. So until next time, friends, stay crypto curious and feel free to send questions, guest recommendations, and comments to me. My email is nico@naavik.co.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.naavik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Naavik Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.naavik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.